Sitting on the far western edge of Europe, like a resilient final stop before the world is swallowed by the endless vastness of the Atlantic Ocean, lies an island. From the air, Ireland appears as a stunning emerald tapestry. With a population of about 5.46 million people, this land is often remembered by the rest of the world as a picture-perfect postcard of peace and tranquility. But don't let that quiet green fool you. If we glide through the rain-soaked clouds and bring our view down to the ground, that dreamy image shatters, giving way to a raw reality. Down there, right beside the peaceful meadows, are narrow country roads. There are harbors where fishing boats wrestle with fierce waves. There are towering glass skyscrapers in modern Dublin. And in another corner, there are young people pulling heavy suitcases onto a train, leaving behind a rural station wrapped in fog. From a distance, Ireland might look like a peaceful island, but if you look a little longer, you'll find a deeper question hidden beneath all that green. What makes people tie themselves to a place, even through the wind and rain, waves of migration, absurdly high housing prices, aging country villages, and a future that constantly pulls its youth toward the glowing cities? Because Ireland isn't just a landscape, it's a profound story about the feeling of belonging. On this island, the rain doesn't just make things wet, it sets the rhythm of life. The fierce Atlantic Ocean isn't just a border. It shapes livelihoods, drives migration, and holds on to memories. Those stone walls aren't just decorative touches. They are the marks of sweat and hard work from countless generations. And those tiny pubs aren't just places to grab a drink. They are the living rooms of entire communities. The ancient Gaelic language, traditional music, and GAA matches are more than just culture. They are the way a nation's memory stays alive. Modern cities don't break Ireland apart, but they do create a painful tug-of-war between life-changing opportunities and hometown roots. And perhaps, when we look at Ireland, we aren't just curious about how they live. Deep down, we are quietly asking ourselves a question. In a world that is moving too fast, growing more disconnected and isolated, what in this life still feels familiar enough to make us want to return? In Ireland, geography does more than just paint stunning landscapes. It is an invisible force, directly organizing and shaping the very fabric of daily life. The climate and terrain dictate how people work, how they get around, how they raise their families, what they chat about each morning, and even how they patiently endure life's hardships. Don't romanticize the endless drizzle this island is known for. The rain falls on the pastures, sinks deep into the soil, and feeds that thick, damp, vivid green. From that green, cattle are grazed and milked. That milk continues the cycle, turning into butter, into cheese, before quietly finding its way to a family's breakfast table. In the most natural and persistent way, the rain is the start of a life cycle that nourishes everything. Wrapping around that rain is the raw fury of the Atlantic. The ocean here is both a generous provider and a ruthless divider. It sustains the fishing trade and builds the harbor towns, but it also leaves a heavy sorrow in the minds of the people, the memory of generations who crossed the water to migrate. Locals don't just stand and gaze at the ocean for its poetic beauty. They watch the water to read the wind, predict the tide, measure the life or death risks, and find a way to survive. Up on the windswept hillsides, countless winding stone walls carve the land into small patches. They weren't built to be a movie backdrop. They are rough, physical pieces of history, the evidence of hundreds of years of grueling labor. Generations of farmers broke their backs, pulling every single stone out of the thin topsoil, turning a barren landscape into a place where they could put down roots. The landscape carves the character of its people. The weather changes so fast that they have simply learned to accept it. The passing storms teach them patience. The endless gray skies teach them to use humor to keep warm, and a rare ray of sunshine breaking through a winter day teaches them to appreciate fleeting moments of beauty. In modern life, we are constantly obsessed with controlling everything: our schedules, our productivity, the weather, and the future. But Ireland offers a quiet reminder. There are magnificent forces that can never be conquered. We can only humbly learn to live alongside them. As you step out of the windswept valleys and head deep into a small village, you'll notice a powerful shift. Here, community isn't an abstract concept. It takes the form of a living organism. If the church is the spiritual gathering place, and the GAA pitch is where local identity is on full display, then the grocery stores, the narrow country lanes, and the morning chats are the bloodstream. They aren't just daily routines, they are a kind of soft social infrastructure. In Ireland, a bakery, a small post office, or the local butcher shop is never just a place where people exchange money for goods. They are relay stations for news and looking out for one another. Someone walking in to buy a loaf of bread might walk out with news of a recent funeral, the weekend match results, a neighbor's illness, or the usual grumbles about the weather. Currency, information, and human connection all flow through those tiny checkout counters at exactly the same time. This intertwined familiarity carries an invisible survival value. In bustling major cities, no one would bat an eye if a nameless stranger didn't show up. But in an Irish village, if an old man doesn't stop by the local shop for his morning paper a few days in a row, his absence is noticed immediately. Someone will go knock on his door to check in. A name remembered by the community, a small habit recognized sometimes, that is the very safety net needed during the harsh winter months. Even driving down the road is a social ritual. When two cars pass each other on a tight country lane, the drivers always lift a finger off the steering wheel to wave. It's a tiny gesture, but it's an unspoken confirmation. I see you, and you are not invisible. Of course, living in a place where everybody knows your name isn't always easy. Privacy is scarce, and gossip tends to travel fast. But in exchange for that nuisance, you will never have to taste the feeling of being abandoned in absolute loneliness. For so many of us, having someone remember our name, our family, and our little habits has become a luxury. We live in massive cities, more crowded than ever, surrounded by millions of people. Yet sometimes we quietly drift through our days like nameless ghosts, desperately craving just a single glance to validate our own existence. The warmth of the Irish is often praised as a defining character trait, but if you look a little deeper into the fabric of these villages, that friendliness isn't just about pleasant conversation. It's actually an invisible care system. It's an informal social safety net that helps people lean on each other to weather life's hardships, whether it's illness, loss, old age, or simply the ache of loneliness. The heart of that care system always beats in the kitchen. It's the place with the worn wooden table, the rich smell of baking soda bread, the steady rhythm of rain on the roof, and a kettle that's always whistling on the stove. In Irish culture, pouring a hot cup of tea is never just common politeness. It's a ritual of acceptance. When someone slides a steaming mug across the table to you, it's a quiet but powerful message. Sit down, take a breath, you belong here. That safety net is woven from extended families. Multiple generations still choose to live close to one another, keeping strong ties with their relatives and the local parish. But that care doesn't stop at the family's front door. Whenever someone goes through a tough time, the community kicks into gear. It could be a quiet fundraiser down at the village hall, dishes of food silently left on a doorstep by neighbors, or an entire town turning up to pay their respects at a funeral. In the city, you might be able to buy care and services, but out here, these fiercely protective relationships are earned and built up over decades of living side by side. When night falls, that care system shifts down to the local pub. A rural Irish pub wasn't built just to sell pints. It serves as the shared living room for the entire community. It's where people gather to mourn after a funeral, celebrate a new baby, debate the latest match, or just soak in a little human warmth. When a village pub closes its doors, it's not just a business going under. It's the collapse of a vital social space, stripping older folks of the one place they had left to go for a conversation during the dark, lonely days of winter. Perhaps what transforms a kitchen into a true home isn't material wealth or expensive appliances. It's the absolute comfort of knowing that someone has saved a seat for you, poured you a hot cup of tea, and asked the simplest, most grounded question of all: how are you doing today? A nation doesn't just keep its history in silent books resting on a shelf. In Ireland, the past continues to breathe and move through sound. Tradition on this island isn't some museum artifact carefully tucked away. It is a living, breathing stream of memory, pouring through language, songs, stories, and community rituals. Even though English is the language of everyday life, the Irish language, or Gaeilge, resiliently holds its ground. In the remote Gaeltacht regions along the rugged west coast, the ancestral tongue remains the mother tongue. The government actively protects these spaces, and in schools across the country, children still learn the language. Irish isn't just a subject on a timetable. It's a concerted effort to make sure the next generation knows how to name a hill, a river, or the rain, using the exact same sounds their grandparents once did. When words fall short in expressing loss, the Irish turn to music. Ballads of love, parting, and waves of emigration are never just sung for entertainment. Inside the pub, a traditional music session has no real boundary between the musicians and the audience. It's a shared circle. Music is where sorrow is divided, a way for a nation to speak of heartbreak without resorting to empty speeches. The Irish are also master storytellers. In a country where saying goodbye is all too common, a good story shared around the fire is a way to hold on to those who are gone. Bringing up the quirks of a neighbor who passed away, or recounting fleeting memories, storytelling is the most beautiful way this community fights back against the cruelty of being forgotten. That memory is also written in sweat on the grass of the Gaelic Athletic Association, or the GA. Tens of thousands of young people take to the pitch to play Gaelic football or hurling without earning a single dime. They play for the colors of their parish, for the absolute honor of their home soil. It is local pride at its fiercest. When an ancient language still rings out, you realize that memory doesn't just sit in an archive. It lives in how people name the world around them. And perhaps, as we endlessly chase progress, many of us have quietly lost a few of those words ourselves, words that once served as the tether connecting us back home. Behind the beauty of Ireland, there is always a hidden layer of labor. The green pastures, the flocks of sheep, the fishing harbors, and the traditional dishes don't just exist to make for pretty pictures. They are the raw result of sweat, harsh weather, and a humble supply chain. To this day, the land and the sea remain the spiritual and economic foundation of Irish life, even as the country has grown incredibly modern. Take a look at those endless green pastures. They are never just there for the view. The Atlantic rain falls to nourish the grass. The fresh grass feeds the cattle, and the cattle produce the milk. Through diligent hands, that milk is turned into butter and cheese before quietly making its way into every family's breakfast. From the grand scale down to the smallest detail, a single raindrop falling on an empty pasture ultimately finishes its journey by nourishing life inside a warm kitchen. The farmer's rhythm of life moves in a strict, unromantic cycle. A new day begins by checking the stone walls, moving the herd across wet grass, and looking up at the sky. Survival here demands patience because it relies entirely on forces beyond human control. Up on the wind-swept hills of the West, a grazing flock of sheep is a living testament to adaptation. Those sheep aren't there for decoration. They tell the story of a rugged, barren land where people had to choose the only livelihood that would let them stay. Look out toward the sea, and you'll see that the Atlantic is a vital source of life, though it never promises absolute safety. A fishing boat returning to the harbor is a daily occurrence, yet it serves as a constant reminder of the lurking dangers. The catch moves from the freezing ocean to the docks, passes through the fishmonger's hands, and finally lands on the dinner table, showing how the sea quietly sustains the coastal communities. The endpoint of this entire chain of labor is the food itself. A steaming bowl of Irish stew, a rustic loaf of soda bread, or a plate of fresh seafood are never just meals. They are the ultimate result of the land, the rough sea, the heat of the oven, the hands of the cook, and cherished family routines. In the modern world, we tend to eat fast, shop fast, and forget even faster. But a rustic meal like this serves as a quiet reminder. Every piece of food has a journey, and behind every dish, there is always the land, the weather, hard-working hands, and a family trying to hold on to each other around a familiar table. It would be a huge mistake to look at Ireland merely as a quiet museum of old rural values. This country isn't standing on the sidelines of the modern era. In reality, modern Ireland exists in a delicate balance, or perhaps a quiet tug-of-war between global tech offices and quiet, solemn fields. In urban centers like Dublin, Cork, or Galway, the rhythm of life flows at a completely different pace. Towering glass office buildings rise up, housing the European headquarters for tech, pharmaceutical, and financial giants. The streets are bustling with trams, buses, rushing college students, and endless construction sites. With a top-tier education system and high-speed internet, Ireland has become a crucial link in the global economy. The appeal of this island has never cooled down either. Statistics show that in April 2026 alone, Roughly 564,600 international visitors made the trip here. This powerful surge in tourism proves that Ireland is no longer an isolated land. But the true charm of this country lies in its cinematic contrasts. You can cruise at high speed down modern highways connecting the major cities, but take one turn off the main road, and you'll instantly drift onto tight country lanes, known as boreens. Changing infrastructure changes behavior. Highways push people to rush faster, but a boreen forces you to hit the brakes. You have to slow down, pull over to make room for oncoming cars, and wave hello. Ireland may be incredibly modern, but it fiercely holds on to spaces that teach people how to slow down. This creates a generation living between two worlds. A young person might spend all week working in a bright, modern startup office, but when the weekend hits, they'll still drive for hours to get back to their village. They go home to attend a wedding, check in on their aging parents, clink glasses at their regular pub, and proudly wear their local GAA club jersey. Modernization didn't erase their roots. It simply forced people to find a way to balance between two different heartbeats. And perhaps many of us are living between two heartbeats just like that, a rushing beat that pushes us forward, and a quiet, aching beat that reminds us of where we once belonged. When a place becomes too beautiful and developed, can the people born there still afford to stay? The biggest challenge for modern Ireland isn't protecting the landscape. It's figuring out how to keep the authentic heartbeat of the community alive amidst fierce economic and housing changes. Young people heading to the city to study and work is meant to be an opportunity, but today, a severe housing crisis is turning that shift into a forced choice. The actual numbers are brutally honest. According to Ireland's Central Statistics Office, or the CSO, residential property prices rose by 6.2% in the 12 months leading up to April 2026. In Dublin, prices went up by 5.4%, while areas outside the capital saw an even sharper increase of 6.9%. The dream of owning a home is drifting further out of reach. Young people are forced to live with their parents longer, rent in distant suburbs, or, most heartbreaking of all, pack their bags and leave their homeland altogether in search of a better horizon. This exodus of the younger generation leaves a massive void in the countryside. CSO data shows that remote areas now have the highest average ages, along with a growing dependency on elderly care. The villages are quietly growing old, schools are losing students, local shops are losing their regulars, and community sports teams are struggling to find enough players. At the same time, the wave of tourism acts as a double-edged sword. It brings in essential revenue, throwing a lifeline to many restaurants and pubs. But when too many homes are turned into short-term rentals, when the roads are jammed with tour buses, and the landscape is consumed like just another product, the local community starts to feel suffocated. They begin to suspect that their own home is slowly being redesigned exclusively for outsiders. That is why the effort to preserve the Irish language, the traditional music, the pub culture, and the GAA pitches isn't just about putting on a cultural show to entertain tourists. It's a quiet battle to protect their core identity. It's about safeguarding the very foundation that reminds them of who they are in such a rapidly changing era. We often call a place beautiful when we are eager to visit it on vacation. But perhaps a much fairer question to ask is that place still kind enough to allow the people born there to actually live, work, grow old, and eventually be laid to rest right next to their loved ones? Despite the freezing rain, the high cost of living, and those endless goodbyes at the airport, millions of people still choose to put down roots on this island. They don't stay because life here is picture perfect. They stay because there are connections you can't buy with money and that you simply can't pack up and take with you if you decide to leave. A comfortable house can be bought anywhere. A new job can be found in any bustling city. But a community that has known your name since the day you were born, neighbors who have witnessed your family's ups and downs for generations, that is something you can never rebuild overnight. Even if someone leaves their hometown to study or work far away, they still long to return on the weekend. They crave walking down that narrow lane, sitting back down in the old pub, hearing a familiar voice, and proudly wearing the colors of their local parish team. They stay because the natural landscape has become their identity. The wind howling through the stone walls, the damp cold of the rain, the gray skies, and those sprawling green pastures are no longer just things on the outside. They have sunk deep into their memories, blended into their voices, molded their character, and completely shaped what home means to them. When we look at Ireland, perhaps the question isn't just why they stay. The deeper question for ourselves is this: in our own drifting lives, what is still familiar enough to call us back? Perhaps home isn't the most perfect place. Perhaps it is simply the place where the sound of the rain, an old road, a warm kitchen, a familiar voice, and the faces that once knew us still have the power to call out our name, right in the middle of a world that is always urging us to leave.